The first thing that you might do is increase the gain. But then now it might get too loud, so we can pull back the output. And then if I turn it on and off, it's a little louder, but you can already hear that there's a difference in the quality of the sound. Welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be an introduction on building effects racks in Ableton Live. We're going to start by talking about what racks are, how they work, and why you might want to use them in your productions. I'm not going to go super in-depth in detailing every little move that I make because otherwise this video would be super long. Instead, we're just going to talk about general concepts and I'm going to walk you through my process for how I design racks. Even if you've built racks before, you're still going to be able to follow along, and by the end of it, we're going to build a tube preamp that we're going to use in a loop. So let's jump into Ableton and get started. So here we are in Live. This is a short electric piano loop that we're going to build an example rack for. The first thing you want to do is hit Control-Alt-B. This will bring up your main menu, and then in the audio effects section, we'll see audio effect rack, and we'll drag that down. Now we have an empty audio effects rack. We can just start dragging in random effects, which is what I'm doing here. And now, if I play that same loop, now you may ask, why would we want to do this? Why put it in a rack? Why not just have it be a chain? The power of racks comes from macros. So what we're going to do is open up the macro menu. We're going to click this dial button at the top here, and we'll see this macro menu. When I first started with Live, I was really intimidated by macros. I didn't understand what they were or why I would want to use them. But this is really why you're going to want to use racks in your projects. So we're just going to need one macro right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this minus button and take away some of the macros. And now we have just one knob. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign or map different parameters of these effects to this one knob. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename it. Let's just call it effects for simplicity. And then let's say the dry wet, we're going to right click and map to FX. That means that when I move this knob here, it's going to move that dry wet on this convolution reverb. So in the erosion, maybe we'll do amount, and then on this echo, we'll do dry wet as well. And then now we can see that this one knob is controlling all three of these controls in the individual effects. So if I blend it in, but now we could go a little deeper with this. Maybe we don't want something so extreme. So what I can do is I can click this M, and this is going to open up the macro map. And then all of the parameters are listed here where the main menu was. So let's say you'll notice there's a minimum and a maximum. Let's say that the convolution reverb, we want the minimum to be 10%, but we don't want it to go above 30%. And let's say for the erosion, we want the minimum to be 10%, but we don't want it to go over 50. And then let's say for the echo, we can have it be 0, but we don't want it to go over 10%. And then now, if I get rid of the map and I start to blend that in, I have something that's a lot more manageable and musical. So now that we understand the concepts behind racks, let's take a look at building a tube preamp. So let's first take a second to talk about preamps. What are preamps and why do we want to use them? If you think about an audio system, there's always going to be a source, which could be anything from an instrument like a guitar or a synthesizer. It could be a microphone, or it could even be something like a record player. All of these sources are going to have different levels of output. So the preamp is going to take that audio signal and boost it without increasing the noise, so that once it enters the amplification stage, it can be amplified and be strong enough to move a loudspeaker. In addition to serving a utilitarian function, many preamps will impart harmonics onto the source audio, which will create a kind of unique sonic fingerprint for that sound. So that's why people like to use them. On screen right now is a schematic for a common tube preamp circuit. I'm not an electrical engineer, so I'm not going to pretend that I know how to read these kinds of diagrams, but our tube preamp is going to be inspired by this kind of architecture. Lucky for us, we can simplify things quite a lot and make this much easier to understand. Our tube preamp is going to look something like this. Imagine the signal flows from left to right. It begins with a source, which could be a microphone or an instrument or a synth like we were talking about before. It enters the preamp. The first input phase you can think of as being like a pad or maybe a phase invert or an impedance switch. Then it hits the first tube, which is going to boost the level to line level. It's going to flow into a tone section, which is going to be like our EQ. Then it's going to flow into the second tube, where it's going to be boosted again, so it's ready for the amplifier. Before we build the rack, I'm actually going to show you what the finished version looks like so you can hear it in action and see how it works. So like I explained a minute ago, I designed this macro panel before I even started building the rack. I wanted to think about what the logic behind the workflow would be, and then it was trial and error from that point to try and figure out how to route the devices. So here's just a synth pad loop, and then now if I engage the tube preamp, the first thing that you might do is increase the gain. But then now it might get too loud, so we can pull back the output, and then if I turn it on and off, it's a little louder, but you can already hear that there's a difference in the quality of the sound. If I want to push the gain even further, I can turn on the pad, and then turn the device on. Turn the pad on, and then now I can really push the gain, the input, I should say. Maybe even add more saturation and color. Now you can really hear it breaking up. And then maybe I want to cut the lows, boost the lows here, maybe boost some mids, and roll off some highs. And then now, there's the difference. So that's up to your taste of how you want to use it. But now, let's look about how we can go about building this. Before we start making the rack, there's two quick things I want to make note of. One is to keep in mind that the order of devices in your effects chain may or may not end up matching the order of macros in the rack itself. You're going to have to weigh the under-the-hood design of whatever you're trying to build versus the user experience of, kind of the utility of the device itself. The other thing to keep in mind is that one device may end up affecting several different macros. So like an example would be one of the tubes in this tube preamp is not only going to affect the coloration and saturation of the sound, it's also going to control it's going to control the output stage. So with that in mind, let's start building our rack. So we're going to start by dragging a fresh rack down. Before we even bring in any devices, we're going to start with the macros. We have 8. We need 10. So we're going to click the plus button, and now we have our 10 macros, and we're going to name each one of them. So the first one is input, the second one is phase, the third one is pad, color, then high pass filter, then low, then mid frequency, I believe. It comes before mid, and then it's high, and then it's the output. Now, we're going to start by dealing with the input phase. So we're going to come here and we're going to get a utility. Now, we're actually going to need 3 utilities. So what I'm going to do is control copy and paste, and now we have 3 utilities. Here's a good example of what I was talking about a second ago. So I was thinking about emulating an analog preamp design. So before I get to the gain, perhaps that fictional preamp may have had the phase invert first and then a pad before the boost. So what I'm going to do is these phase inverts, I'm going to map to phase, and this one as well. And then this gain here is going to be my pad from the second utility, so I'm going to map that to pad. And then the input for the overall device is going to be this third utility. So you can kind of see in practice how that would work. After the gain, our signal is going to hit the first tube. So let's get a dynamic tube. And then I'm just going to kind of breeze through this, but basically we're going to map the output of the tube to the input macro control, and then the same for the drive, the envelope, and the bias. Next, we're going to need some tone controls. So I went with the channel EQ, and the reason for that is because the channel EQ is supposed to kind of emulate an analog EQ. So this is pretty simple. You can guess what we want is to map the low to low, mid to mid, high to high, This is the sweepable mid-frequency, so we're going to map that to mid-frequency, and then here is the high-pass filter button, and we are going to map that to HPF. This is a good opportunity to stop and talk about a couple of concepts. So thinking about a tube preamp, when you have an audio signal that's passing through an analog circuit, all of the transistors and tubes and different parts of that circuit are going to impart harmonics onto that sound. So to accomplish this, we're going to use a saturator. The saturator is really kind of like the secret sauce that's going to elevate this effects rack to the next level and kind of tie everything together. So let's just bring one down here, saturator. And the saturator, this is another example of how like we're just glossing over the points here. I could do a full tutorial just on the saturator because it's a very robust device, but we're just going to try and walk through the process of what the mappings are, and then we'll talk about the parameters later. So the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure it's set to analog clip, then soft clip here, and then make sure this color button is engaged. Then open up this extension menu, and then what we're going to do here is we're going to map the input, the drive to the input, the output to the input, the dry wet to the input, and then we're going to have this frequency. This is an optional kind of thing. I like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to map the frequency to the mid frequency. And what I'm going to show you is you're going to lose here. You're not going to be able to see where that frequency band is, so you're just going to have to use your ear to tune it how you like, the mid-range, that is. But that's optional. If you like having that frequency value showed in that macro, you can leave this out. Then what we're going to do is we're also going to, this amount low, we're going to map to color. Amount high, we're going to map to color. And width, we're going to map to color. The reason we're doing this is because this is going to kind of, as we're pushing the signal through and adding gain and boosting and cutting different frequencies, that's going to have downstream effects of the harmonic structure of the sound. And that's going to kind of add to the magic, for lack of a better word, of the saturation and coloration. And finally, to end off, we are going to add a second dynamic tube. And this is going to be kind of like our power amp for our loudspeakers. And what we're going to do is we're going to map the envelope to input. We're going to map drive to input. We are going to map the output to output. So this is going to be kind of like the global volume control for our device. And then bias is going to go to color. And then this is also kind of like a cool thing. They have these different tube types. So this is also going to go to color. And what I'm going to do is, instead of you watching me fill in all of the values on the macro map, I'm going to put the map from the final version up on the screen right now. So if you're following along, you can pause it and then fill in the values for yourself. Then the last thing is, if you click this button here, that will collapse all of those devices, and now you have a nice, neat effect rack. So let's jump over to another session where we can hear it in action on a beat. So here's a quick loop so we can hear this thing in action. This is without the preamp. We have a operator square lead melody. We have an upright piano. We have this arpeggiated guitar. Very Alan Parsons project. A drum loop. A fretless bass. And an electric piano. Let's hear the electric piano with the preamp. So here's without. Here it is with. Just a little bit of color in there. Let's just hear for fun. We'll hear the drums with the tube preamp. So this is without. Here's with. Just a little heavier. And once again without. And then now let's hear everything. I also have the tube preamp on the master bus. So let's hear it with, right now. It's maybe a little bit louder, but I put this utility here to gain match. That's without. Here it is with. Even though I tried to gain match it as best I could, but even with that little bit of boost in volume, you can hear that there's still this warmth that's imparted by the preamp. So you can use this on individual sources, you can use it on groups, even on the master bus, and it can be very subtle or it can be very extreme. And if you didn't want to go through and follow along to build it yourself, it is free to download in the description, which I invite you to do. So there is your intro to Ableton racks. Even though we didn't go super in-depth into all the little details of each device, hopefully this sparks your own creativity and gives you some ideas of things that you can build. If you want to watch more music production videos, you can click the one on the screen right now. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.